You're listening to the Pulled by the Root podcast.
Hello, everyone. This is Happy Marlo, host of the Pulled by the Root podcast. I am so excited to share this episode with the beautiful Rebekah Clark. She is an adoptee with a resume that wraps around the globe a couple of times. It is impressive what this vivacious, sparkly, positive human being has done with the pain that has been handed to her. I found this episode to be truthful, to be inspiring. She was also very tolerant of my questions about what is a Whippet and the difference between north, south, east, and west, which clearly I don't understand. So we also had a few laughs, but there's a lot of heart and soul inside of this episode. And her accent doesn't hurt. So jealous of that. I hope you guys enjoy. Welcome to the Pulled by the Root podcast. I am overjoyed to have adoptee Rebekah Clark from East London today visiting us. This episode is going to be incredible. I would like to read you her bio. Rebekah Clark is a connector, creator, and curator with an international media, marketing, and communications career spanning over 20 years. Rebekah has delivered global campaigns, films and TV, written content, and events reaching a wide range of audiences. The golden thread which runs through all of her work is storytelling for social impact and transformation. Rebekah's passion is people, and with all things that matter, good health, well-being, education, having enough food to eat, a roof over our heads, being in a position where we can thrive. She helps people, brands, and organizations tell compelling stories that really connect and make a difference. To date, she has collaborated with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, UNICEF, the World Health Organization, Harvard University, the Malala Fund, Her Majesty's government, the UAE government, and the EU. Her film and entertainment work, has been seen partnerships with Searchlight Pictures, Participant Media, Sesame Street, the British Film Council, and the Soho House Group. In non-pandemic times, Rebekah and her young family are avid travelers. She has visited 5 of the 7 continents, and her work has spanned Europe, North America, Africa, and the Middle East. Rebekah and her husband resided in the United Arab Emirates for 5 years. Rebekah is also a board member at Under One Sky, a UK-based nonprofit with the ambitious goal to end homelessness. She is also the creative producer and host of the podcast Sharing Tales, a platform providing everyday people with the opportunity to discuss and explore some of the key chapters of their lives. Her current business baby and her most ambitious endeavor to date is Happy Marlo, a well-being platform and community on a mission to change childhoods through the creation and curation of a tailored healing modality. Rebekah lives in North London. I said East. I'm sorry, Rebekah. I'm directionally challenged. So North London with her husband, 2-year-old daughter, an aloof tabby cat, and the friendliest Whippet in the world. Oh my gosh, Rebekah, I need to eat and drink what you're eating and drinking. You have accomplished so much. But the first and most important question of the interview is, what is a Whippet?
What is a Whippet? Oh my goodness. A Whippet is a dog. I guess they are a British breed. They're known from the north of the country. I want to say specifically the northeast, but I just assumed that you would have them in the States.
I'm sure we do, but I was like, what is a Whippet? I'm afraid.
Oh, they're adorable dogs that are very, very skinny and very, very fast. Very
okay,
fast.
Well, I need to Google that, Rebekah. So now that we've had a little humor, I would love it if you could just start by telling us your story, your origin story, and a little bit about what has brought you to all these incredible things that you're doing in the world.
Yeah, well, firstly, Heidi, thank you so much for having me. I've really been looking forward to having this conversation with you. So it's really lovely to spend this time with you. In terms of my origin story, I was born in 1978 in North London. So I've actually come home. I was born to a young white single mother. And at that point, everything, at least, to me and my subsequent adoptive family, everything about my father was unknown. But what was very clear, because of my appearance, was that he was Black, but we didn't know where in the world he was from. I later found out that I was conceived in Oxford. My birth mother had run away from home, from what I understand, with her best friend. And they were kicking around in Oxford at the end of the 70s. And in some way, or through some encounter, she met my birth father. And when she found out she was pregnant, these two young women fled to London. And that's where I was born subsequently, born in North London. And it became clear pretty quickly that these two young women, my mother, they were ill-equipped to look after me. And in fact, they weren't looking after me. It came to pass that I was kind of being left in this North London flat for hours on end. They were almost, from what I understand, living their lives as though there weren't a baby that they should be caring for. And I know a lot of this information now because probably around 8 years ago, I got my records from social services. And so I'm able to kind of tell this story with a lot more colour than I was able to for many, many years. And so during those kind of first 10 months of my life, as I said, I wasn't being cared for properly. There was a period where I was actually in hospital for around 3 weeks. Because I'd had some kind of injury to my leg, and then it was kind of decided, let's just keep her here for a bit while social services were trying to kind of figure out what to do. And as always, I don't know if it's the same in the US, but even here was the case then and is the case now. The authorities really work hard to keep birth children with their birth parents. And so that's really why I was with my birth mother for those 10 months. I possibly should have been taken from her before, but there was some work being done to see if we could stay together. And unfortunately, it got so bad that social services, sounds very dramatic, but social services kind of came and took me in the middle of the night. My birth mother and her friend weren't there. They had a court order and they took me from that property and placed me in emergency foster care. Because it was the middle of the night, that's often how these things would happen. You would find a family to just take the child for a day or two until there was a more permanent solution. And that was the plan. But then I went to that family, the Clarks, and I didn't leave. What was meant to be a kind of 48-hour placement ended up being, a placement of a lifetime. And so I was with my family from 10 months, and then they officially adopted me at 3. But I never went back to my mother at all. I think I maybe had a couple of visits in that period, but I stayed there once I was there. And so that's the beginnings of my story.
Yeah. Wow. Wow, Rebekah, that is an intense beginning for sure. And when did you start to process or understand what all of this meant for your life? Like, what was your childhood like? Because you said, you're biracial, and how does that play in? Because I know I'm white, and I went into a white family, and I still felt different. So it's just really interesting to hear that point of view and that kind of experience.
Yeah, and Heidi, it's a really big part of my story for sure, because the Clarks are a British white family. And back in those days, I mean, things have changed a lot here in the UK, not perfect by any means, but back in those days, late 70s, early 80s, that was really unusual to see a mixed race baby with a white family. In fact, it's one of the things anecdotally understood around my birth mother. She was ashamed to take me out. That's often why I was left in the flat, because it was so visible that she had a child of colour. And yeah, growing up, I found that really difficult in terms of being with my adoptive family. It's this sense of being utterly visible at all times. And, just kind of being out on family days out, or going to the shops, or parents' evening at school, I always felt that is that word, that visibility, when really as a child, you just want to blend into the background. You don't want to stand out, particularly not for those kinds of reasons. And so that was really challenging. I would say I grew up in a very white environment, a very white culture. My family, fairly religious, very religious. They're part of the Salvation Army. And then at school and the neighborhood we lived, there weren't many, if any, brown faces. I mean, at school, I would say in my year, there are a handful of us that were non-white, literally a handful. And so, I guess I learned very early on that I was different, and different for lots and lots of reasons. Like it was almost like they were layered on top of each other. And it really took me a long time to be able to unpick them. So I'm adopted, I'm mixed race, adopted by a white family. My parents were quite old for that time. So my parents are 42 years older than me, which now I have my baby when I was 40 is normal now. But back then it wasn't, my peers' parents, they'd had them in their 20s. And so there was that disconnect. I went to this church, which for a lot of people, the Salvation Army, that's a charity. They wear uniforms, they play instruments. That's weird and out there. What's that all about? So it was all of these things. I'm just like, oh my goodness. I would just like to have a really quiet, small, invisible childhood. And it just wasn't to be. So it was really tough. It was really,
definitely. Thank you for explaining it that way. I think what really stood out about what you just said, Rebekah, was the invisible visible. It's like those things can live in duality, because I can only speak for my experience, but I've been hearing a lot from adoptees that we do feel like our true selves is invisible, but then this other element is visible that makes us feel different. And I was actually listening to, I love Oprah, and I was listening to one of her interviews. She just wrote a book about trauma, and he was speaking about, how the layers of trauma, they really do affect us. And that just really resonated with me when you were saying that. And I'm just so curious too about how you processed, I guess, the ghost kingdom, or wondering about your birth family. Did you ever seek them out? Can you tell us maybe a little bit more about that journey, if you feel comfortable?
Absolutely. And I've been reading about Oprah's new book too, and the posing of the question, what happened to you?
Yes, really Rebekah, that's it. Mm-hmm.
Really powerful. In terms of my birth family, so we had some information about my birth mother, and indeed my parents met her a couple of times. But it's really funny how things can get lost in memory, or things become legend, and I'm not quite sure how this happens. It's like the Queen said recently around recollections may vary, and that, there's definitely some of that in my story. So my birth mother is English. I later found out she was born in Germany, and her mother, my maternal grandmother, is Irish. But I was always told growing up, your mother was Irish. You are half Irish. And so that was interesting. I found out the truth of it when I was in my 20s. And so I never had any contact with my birth mother when I was growing up. And my parents, it's not that they wouldn't talk about her, but there was almost this sense of, well, that we don't know very much. You know everything you need to know. What's the point of talking about her? And then the piece about my birth father was even more tricky, because nobody seemed to really know anything about him. And so that was difficult. That was very painful for a number of reasons. The most obvious, or the biggest one, being because of how I look, and because of this big part of my visible identity, us having no information about that. And I grew up constantly being asked by people, where are you from? Where are you from? And what they really meant was, where is your father from? And to not be able to have an answer to that was really, really painful, troubling, and shameful. I understood quite quickly that there was some shame around this. And I always felt, I don't know why, growing up, I always felt like I couldn't lie or kind of bat away these questions. I felt like this huge weight of, oh no, now I have to tell this person, often, you know, a near stranger, my whole story and be really vulnerable and have to give all of this information about myself away. As an adult, I know that I didn't have to do that, but you don't know that when you're a child. Mm-hmm. And so again, this was another thing that kind of added to the layer of difference. Well, she doesn't even know where she's from. She has no idea who her father is. And so that was definitely very hard. And it became almost, again, this legend in our family that my birth mother was a bit of a villain and my birth father was the innocent hero because he doesn't even know I exist, right? That was what we believed or understood. And another little kind of piece for him to be, you know, the prince of this story is because I was conceived in Oxford, as I mentioned, there was some story around him potentially being an international student at the University of Oxford, which, you know, even today, going to Oxford is hugely prestigious. But you can imagine back then, when even less people were going to Oxford or Cambridge, and then add in an international student. Oh my goodness, you know, this man must be one of the brightest and the best. You know, this is where you get your smarts from and all of that stuff. So it was never as explicit as that sat down and told, but it was just over the years, that was the story. You know, my birth mother was kind of the young, foolish girl who, you know, had been irresponsible and not cared for me. And my birth mother's, we just don't know. We just know that he doesn't know about you and he's really, really clever. And so that's, and I don't know if that happens for other people. You know, it's that kind of thing of you can't, but people that pass away are innocent too, right? It's when something's unknown or someone isn't present, you can kind of make them whatever you want them to be. And I'm very conscious and aware of that now as an adult. But when I was growing up, it was very easy to kind of just, you know, go along with that too. So I always wanted to find my birth father, to know where he's from, to know if I had any siblings, for example. And he still remains a huge mystery. I did do a DNA test a few years ago, and that was news in that it came back that I was half Nigerian. And that chimes with something my birth mother did tell me when I was in my early 20s. She said that my birth father was Jamaican, and I wasn't sure of it, but I actually now know quite a few other women who are half British and half Jamaican. And when they have done their DNA test, it goes back to Nigeria. And so, of course, that kind of fits in with the slave trade and the movement from West Africa to the Caribbean. So, yeah, I haven't met either of my birth parents. I know where my birth mother is. I know that I have two half sisters, but I still don't know anything about my birth father.
Wow. Oh, Rebekah, it sounds like a movie. It really, really does. Wow. So how do you cope and process all of this? Because one of the things that drew me to you was you just have such a light about you and such a beautiful energy that just jumps out of the screen. And I can't even imagine being around you in person, what that has to feel like. You know, for someone who's been through so much, it feels to me so inspiring to see you have joy and be able to give back in the way that you do. And I just wonder, there has to be something you're doing to cope. And I think maybe this would be a good time to segue into Happy Marlo, because the videos that I've seen, they always just fill me up. They don't drain me. I just look forward to your beautiful smile. And I don't know what I'm trying to ask here. I just would love for you to share with us how you manage, because we all need to hear how we cope so that we can get more tools in our own toolbox.
Well, thank you for saying those kind things, Heidi. It really means a lot to hear that. And I can't wait until we meet in person and we can have a big hug. What I would say, going back to growing up, and then particularly when I was in secondary school, so that's 11 to 16, in the middle of that, around kind of age 13 to 15, I experienced some really bad bullying. And it was nothing to do with my adoption. It wasn't anything to do with my race. But I would say that, you know how bullies, they always kind of see the weakest in the pack. And I think because of this baggage that I was carrying, emotionally, I was also carrying it with weight. So I was always, you know, a chubbier child. I think I was kind of an easy target. And I was never very good at standing up for myself. I'd always be better at standing up for other people. But what I kind of understood, and I don't think I would have named it as that then, but I deep down, I think I just was born with a real fighting spirit and a real sense of, you know, resilience. I always remember Rosemary, who was my social worker, and I later kind of chose her as my godmother. She would tell me later, when she came to that flat to pick me up, I was just sitting there really quietly, as if I was just peacefully waiting for someone to come and collect me. And she had said as well that one of the reasons it took them so long to come and to get the court order to get me was that they didn't often know if someone was in there or not, because I wasn't crying. And neighbours would say, we're sure there's a baby in there, we don't hear a peep. And so I think that's why I think I was kind of almost born with this sense of just got to get through this, just got to quietly get through this. And then as I became older and I was going through that stuff at secondary school, the focus for me very much became about university. I just need to keep my head down, need to keep going, because university is going to be my escape. I can run away from this town, I can finally, hopefully, be seen for who I am, rather than all this other stuff. And university was great in a lot of ways, but it was also my first lesson in wherever you go, there you'll be. And so, of course, I brought a lot of this baggage with me. And so I think one of the things I would also say, I've always been really open to the spiritual parts of life. I mentioned that my family was religious. And although I realized pretty early on I wasn't really a fan of organized religion, I don't like rules very much. I don't like having to wear a uniform either, which you do in the Salvation Army.
This is another reason why I like you.
Yeah, I don't like badges or uniforms or rules or authority, really. But I'm definitely a very spiritual person and always have been. And I think that has really formed my healing journey. I always had this belief there was more than we could see. There was more than we can understand. And so I was always seeking these things out. I didn't mind, going to see a hypnotherapist. I didn't mind going to have Reiki. And this is like in my early 20s, or, talking therapy or CBD. I mean, between holistic and kind of more traditional therapies, I've kind of dabbled in them all. And I think for a long time, I was looking for the golden ticket, like the one technique or modality that would fix me, that would just release me from all of this pain. And I came to realize as the years rolled on that actually there is no final destination of being fixed. It's just more of this ongoing journey of reconciliation with some things, or coming to terms with, or indeed acceptance about things that have gone before, but really as well acceptance for myself. And so I had this strong realization when I was turning 40 a few years ago, like, gosh, I've spent the last 20 years really healing and working through and coming to terms with everything that happened in the first 20 years of my life. And it was around that time, you mentioned Happy Marlo, which is the well-being for children business that I'm in the process of launching. It was around that time when I entered my 40s, I knew that I was looking for something more in terms of my work. I knew that I wasn't didn't feel like I was quite fulfilling my potential, and that I also really wanted to consolidate all these different parts of me, so that as I call it, I could just be me all the time. And so I had lunch with a friend last week who I hadn't seen for a little while, and we were just chatting away, and I said, I don't think I'm become more spiritual. I'm just not hiding anymore. Like, I can't be bothered to hide it anymore. So if I'm gonna talk about, the universe and all this kind of stuff, you're just gonna have to embrace it. And so, yeah, that's what I would say. It was almost like trying and exploring all of these different things and I think it's unique and personal to everyone. But for me, they all kind of came together so that by the time I did get to my 40s, I kind of felt, and it's probably getting older too, but I did feel at last a sense of peace. And so that led me to think about, how can I live my life more purposefully? And how can I use my experiences and all of the things that have happened in a really positive way? And so that's why I'm kind of channeling all of my energy and expertise and experience into Happy Marlo, which is all about supporting children and their own emotional well-being journeys. And I'm really excited about the potential and possibility for that.
I think it's amazing. And I also think the give back. Can you explain that part of Happy Marlo as well?
So Happy Marlo is a digital platform. So we're building out an app, and it's also a community. And when we launch officially, there will be a monthly subscription, as is quite normal with apps. But at the heart of Happy Marlo, we're purpose-driven in terms of first and foremost around supporting children. But I also wanted to really give back to some of the children that have, find things particularly hard from the off. And so for every paid subscription, one will be gifted to a child who has either been in foster care or has been adopted. And I'm really excited about that too.
I think that's so beautiful, because I literally every night, I call it my bedtime stories. I open up all my little apps and I listen, and it's just depositing like something wholesome and something nourishing. And I think to have that for children that are in pain and to be able to gift that forward, it's such a beautiful concept. And I'm so excited for you, Rebekah. I think that's such a beautiful way also to heal, because I think that, for me doing this platform as well, it is a healing journey to be able to speak your truth, to show up fully as you are, to talk about the universe or whatever else, to be able to take those walls down and be vulnerable with ourselves and our story. It's a really, really scary move, but I think it's a necessary one. And I'm just so glad that you're able to do that. And I am in process of, I do it sometimes, depending on the company. So I'm still a student learning. One of the other things I wanted to talk to you about, I saw some pictures of your beautiful child. Oh my gosh, the cutest. And I just wonder, I know for me, when I became a mother, it was such a tectonic shift. It is when the intensity of meeting my first birth relative, my first genetic mirror, the primal urge to find my birth family was an obsession. It became unquenchable. And I know that I have parented based on fear, which I'm realizing now, because I never want my son to feel abandoned. And now he's 24. And what do? You say, I'm sorry. But it's really interesting to think about how people that are adopted and have had, foster adopt experiences and had that profound early rejection, how does it translate into parenting? I know for me, we were talking, I was talking to someone else about being a helicopter. I'm like a Black Hawk, man. I've got like the big huge. And luckily he turned out in spite of me, Rebekah. But I just wonder, I think it's interesting to kind of take an inventory of different adoptee experiences in parenting too. So if you wouldn't mind sharing, your experience and how it impacted you.
Of course. Well, for a long time, my husband and I couldn't decide whether to have children or not. I mean, when I was growing up, of course I was going to get married and have children because that's what everyone does. And then when we did get married, we kind of shifted a little bit. But then when we finally made the decision that we would like to try and have a family, we were both all in. And I was very conscious of the mother wound. And one of the things when I was trying to get pregnant, unsurprisingly, because of what I said before, I was having acupuncture, because acupuncture is good as well for healing. And I went to a fertility specialist in acupuncture, and the first few sessions were, Hannah was her name, were all about talking about my relationship with my adoptive mother, my internal relationship with my birth mother, even with my mother-in-law. So we could really unpick some of these different things, which I wasn't expecting at all. And I wouldn't have necessarily thought about, but I found that really, really helpful, particularly alongside all of the other work that I had done. One of the things while I was pregnant that I was really conscious of was, my husband is white, and I didn't want my daughter to have to face the same kind of questions that I did around, where are you from? I mean, the irony is, Heidi, we live in North London. No one cares. It's so diverse. It's a different time. Fast forward 40 years. It's like
Thank goodness.
It's like a different planet. Really, no one could care less. But it was important to me to almost kind of claim our heritage on both of our behalves. And so whereas before I mentioned my birth mother had said in my early 20s that my birth father was from Jamaica, and I was like, I don't know if I believe that. It was just because I kind of didn't believe a few things she'd said in this letter, so I was very skeptical. But I remember so clearly being quite pregnant and walking down the street and thinking, you know what, my birth mother told me that my birth father was Jamaican. How about I believe her? How about I just accept that as the truth? And it was very funny because after I kind of made that decision, the universe started kind of putting Jamaica in my path in all kinds of different ways. And I met a woman called Jessica Huey, who does some brilliant work, particularly around purpose and coming home to ourselves. And I met Jessica around that time, and she's half British and half Jamaican, and she was running a retreat in Jamaica and invited me to go. And one of the things I kind of loved on her website about it was, these are the reasons to come on this retreat. And one of them was, if you have a negative perception about Jamaica, I'd love to invite you to show you my Jamaica. And I realized that I did have a bit of a negative perception about Jamaica. Probably from the media in this country. It was all kind of, I had images of sandals resorts because we had some reality shows. I think you probably had them in the US too.
Oh yes, we do.
That type of thing, yeah. Yardies, drugs, gangs, all of this stuff. It's quite a lot of negative, or there was a lot of negative press when I was growing up about Jamaica. And so to go with Jessica in this really safe, spiritual, lovely way seemed like too good an opportunity to pass up. And so I went when my daughter was 1, actually, and it was really lovely to be there. She didn't come, but to be there and experience that and feel a connection to that place. And so that was another important piece of the puzzle, taking ownership of that for the two of us. And then, as you said, this first time of having someone who's a blood relation, someone who is fully part of yours, has been a huge part of my healing journey. And, from pretty much from when she was born, people would say, oh, she's your double. She's your double. She's your mini-me. And I have to admit, my husband's been very gracious around this because it happens all the time. I absolutely love it. I'm not ashamed to say I love it. I've got this mini-me. I love that people are like, you are a pair. You two belong together. And I think it's something only adopted people can truly understand. To have that bond, it is like nothing else because you've never experienced it before. and to have that, as I love having a daughter, I would have loved having a son, but there's something special in having this mirror, in having this, you know, she's a sassy little girl. And my husband's often, oh, you know, I wonder where she gets that from. And we're very musical and we love dancing together. And, you know, she is her own person. I have no illusions, or, you know, I respect that. But I love that for our time together in this earth, that we do have that connection, and I feel absolutely blessed to have her.
Yeah, that's so wonderful that, you know, you're able to fully embrace and enjoy it. And I think that would be my advice as an older mother with a son that's raised, is, you know, try to get fear out of the way as much as possible, because I think adoptees have the potential to be incredible parents, because we understand what it feels like to not have that experience. And so I think, you know, and that's another thing I'd like to talk to you too, Rebekah, about before we go. You know, we talk a lot about the negative things that happen in adoption, and there are plenty. We are overrepresented in mental health issues. Our suicide rates are it's absolutely crushing to think about the pain. But what I also see when I'm interviewing people, I don't want to call them superpowers, but there is something so strong and majestic about how so many of us have taken the pain and morphed it into compassion, into helping heal others. And I think that's what you are doing as well. And I wonder if you can speak about that to other adoptees who are maybe really in the trenches, really suffering. There's so much darkness. And is there some hope you can offer them, or advice that you would like to give?
I think from my perspective, it's finding the way to embrace the difference. So when we were talking before about the being visible, or all these different layers of everything that was different to my peers, and hating that, just wanting to be like everyone else, what I would say is that is actually the magic. You spoke about superpower. I think that's the gift of being different, and it's going to show up in its own unique way for each individual, and the stories around, you know, their origin and their adoption. But thinking about our friend Oprah, when I was thinking about, you know, Happy Marlo, without knowing that's what it was going to be, but really exploring what expression do I want to make, what legacy do I want to create, I really fell into, I know Oprah, and I think Gail has spoken about this too, around your mess being your message, or your healing being your calling. And so I think there's something in that as well for all of us, that when we look at our unique stories, the things that make us special, what in there can we use to move forward with? What is the golden nugget that we can use as our gift to give back to the world, or to really express ourselves in a way that can feel meaningful and joyful? So it's almost like turning the negative on its head.
Yeah, and that feels very empowering. And I think some people, I know I can get intimidated by the powerhouses that are out there just making swooping change. But it's okay if we can use our gifts in our way, in our nucleus, as far as it stretches. And I was interviewing this amazing author the other day, and she practices Judaism. And she was telling me, and I can't remember how to say it, but she said part of their religious practice is doing something to heal the world. And she said it can be giving someone who's thirsty a glass of water. And when she said that, I thought to myself, wow, it doesn't have to be some magnificent, spotlight.
No.
It can be just that small gift, that small offering. And so I think that, you know, as speaking about that, it hopefully invites everyone to say, I can do this. I can do this too.
Absolutely. And you're reminding me of the work that we're doing with Under One Sky, the homelessness nonprofit you mentioned. And that is very much our philosophy there. the nonprofit has big ambitions around ending homelessness, but we're taking it right back to the grassroots of inviting and asking every individual to think, what could you do in your local neighborhood? What could you do on your street to help someone? Because as much as there are people without homes, it's also about preventing that, stopping things getting to that point. Is there a meal that an extra meal that you could give to a family down the street that's struggling a little bit, or whatever it might be? And what I think, what you're talking about, Heidi, is really exciting. It doesn't have to be, we're not all going to be Bill Gates, and that's okay. All of us have the power and the opportunity to do really small but really powerful acts that help the people that are in our proximity, that are in our communities, that are on our streets. It doesn't matter. And it could even be as simple as being the first to say hello. I often on the nursery run will see the same mums or dads going in the opposite direction, wheeling our kids. And, it's part of the British culture. We're known for not being particularly over-friendly. And so it's just taking that chance of looking that other person in the eye and saying, hi, how are you today? And going on your way. You don't know what impact even that small gesture is going to make. And so it's those things. There's so much that all of us can do that are within our gift, that don't cost anything. Just a little bit of, being proactive and thinking about what we might want to do.
Oh, Rebekah, this has been such an extraordinary time. And I usually do this at the beginning, but I also kind of resist organized religion. I keep dabbling in it, but I also consider myself very spiritually driven. I think I find God most when I'm outside, or I see a baby's toes, or the sun is setting, or I'm cooking something that smells amazing. But my little ritual before I speak to someone, to sort of get my spirit organized and to be able to be present when I'm with someone, I have this beautiful quote box. And I just think of the person. And today, of course, it was you, Rebekah. And I just kind of hold you in this space and I pull a quote. And that means that I'm supposed to share it with you. At least that's my version. And this is what I pulled for you. If in our daily life we can smile, if we can be peaceful and happy, not only we, but everyone will profit from it. This is the most basic kind of peace work. Wow. Goosebumps, because you just said that.
Yeah.
And there is your beautiful smile. And those of you that are on the podcast, you have a beautiful smile. Rebekah, I so hope I recorded this. If I did, you're going to have to. Yeah, I see it blinking, so that's a good sign. But is there anything else that you would like to say before we finish up, before we go?
No, Heidi, I just wanted to say again, thanks for having me. And I'm so excited to have found you, the wonders of the internet. And I'm so impressed by the work you're doing, both with this podcast, and I know what you're doing behind the scenes with your film. And it's really important, it's really timely. And so I'm just so thrilled and honored to be a small part of it. So thank you for including me.
Well, I'm just so happy to be connected to you, Rebekah, and I'm looking very forward to that hug and to having you back again and to hearing more about Happy Marlo. So thank you so much. From what side of London?
North London.
It's okay. Thank you, Rebekah.
Thanks, Heidi. Lots of love.
Thank you.